Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo. Welcome to Business as Usual. Very excited by today's guest, and in a moment, I will introduce him. Want to give a shout out once again to Huntington Bank for all the support that they've provided our community right from the onset of the pandemic up until this very moment. They're still very active in terms of supporting small businesses as well as some of our larger institutions. So I want to give a shout out to them for them believing in everything that we do. Today's program, I'm very excited to have Masahiro, also known as Ogiso, and Ogiso, I always got that wrong. He's president and CEO of Oriden, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Mitsubishi. You probably aren't familiar with their presence here in the region, so we're pretty excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. And so I'm going to jump in. We have a chat. We're hoping that there's questions and we have some exchange, but Mas is going to pack us with information on things that probably many of us aren't as familiar with, not only that presence in Pittsburgh, but just the work that they're doing. So welcome, Masahiro. Thank you so much for being here. And what would be great is that before we get into the actual contents of the work that you do, is to talk about who is Mas in terms of the work that he does and the journey that you've had right up until this very moment in terms of your role as president at Oriden.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you for having me on this program. Very much appreciate the opportunity. So a little bit about myself. I've been in the energy industry for most of my career. I started out actually non-energy related with Price Waterhouse, and realized that I wanted to be on the front end of changes that I was seeing in the market. So I took a leap of faith and jumped ships to join GE in their energy financial services business up in Connecticut, and that's where I got to understand the energy industry. Spent a couple of years there. Came back. Did my MBA and ended up joining a local wind developer called EverPower Wind Holdings, working for Jim Spencer, and spent the next 8 years with them, growing the business from one project to 750 megawatts across 7 sites. We built a pipeline over 2 gigawatts, and we sold that in 2018. The operating fleet to BlackRock, and we sold the development platform to Ingenuity, a German utility. They have an office here in Pittsburgh now as well. And then shortly thereafter, we came across an opportunity to join Mitsubishi to start their renewable energy development arm for them. And myself and 6 others, we came on board in 2018, and we've been with them and grown this business since then.
So what's your presence in Pittsburgh and just in terms of people? How many people?
We've grown from 7 people to right now we're at 20 people now.
Okay.
We recruited people from far as California. Our head of engineering came from California. Our system designer came from North Carolina. We just hired another interconnection person from North Carolina as well. So we're adding jobs to our company, and hopefully we can continue to grow.
And so you're here in Pittsburgh, right? So your team is based in Pittsburgh?
That's right. We have an office on the North Shore. We lease a space. It's actually the Burns White building that you see heading into town. And,
sure.
And we're the first tenant in this building. We just expanded by another 10 desks within the floor. So, we're going to be hopefully filling out these desks pretty quickly soon.
That's great. So that's great. So today we're going to jump right in. You're representing Oriden, which I would venture to say is not a household name yet in Pittsburgh, even though your presence and what you're doing soon will be. And give us like the history of Oriden and how that fits into the Mitsubishi strategy.
Sure. So Oriden is a wholly owned subsidiary of Mitsubishi Power. And Mitsubishi Power is a wholly owned subsidiary of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. So when you usually think about Mitsubishi, you think of the car company, Mitsubishi Motors. There's Mitsubishi Electric up in Cranberry. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries was kind of the bread and butter how Mitsubishi started. They started the Mitsubishi name in the shipbuilding business. So it just started with the shipbuilding, moved into other heavy industries. So in the United States and throughout the world, Mitsubishi Power is known as a gas turbine OEM, so original equipment manufacturer. They make heavy-duty gas turbines. They have the #1 market share. They also make forklifts. They make offshore wind turbines. So they're in the business of making things. But as you probably know, over the last several years, renewables, the cost of renewables have come down so much. Mm-hmm. When you look at where their customers are spending money, the utilities are spending money more on renewables. The independent power producers are spending more money on renewables. For them, they wanted to start a business within the US to really understand the renewable business. And this is their first step into that space. It's their first step working as developers as well. So it's not just selling equipment now, it's developing projects from the grassroots level, from the site identification, going through the permitting process, all the way through to construction and ownership of these assets as well. So for us, we're the eyes and ears to the ground for the Japanese Mitsubishi company, looking at where the trends are, where the new technologies heading to, and that's what. And right now we focus on solar and energy storage within the U.S. and our footprint is national at this point. So we started out just looking at Pennsylvania and New York within the first few months. But then we've quickly expanded to other geographies. So we have projects in the Southeast. We got a project in Georgia that we're talking to a large corporate off-taker on right now. We got projects in Virginia. We go pretty much far west as Montana, Utah, and New Mexico as well.
So you recently completed a project in upstate New York. Can you talk about that? And talk about the value that it provides to that customer. I think you mentioned it was the SUNY system and Fredonia.
Sure. I think before I get into that project, the key thing to mention from our business is that we do both behind the meter, which is on site, right? So if you're a company that has large amounts of land right next to it that you want to do a site on site, or if it's a large rooftop, mm-hmm. Those are projects that are on site, and the energy that's created is used to offset the load or their energy usage that's on site. We also do grid connected, which is larger sites that connect to the grid, both at we can do distribution level as well as the large transmission level as well. So we have projects as big as 250 megawatts right now in our pipeline, but we have projects as small as 1 to 2 megawatts. This first project that we entered into construction earlier this year is a 2 megawatt total. So it's 1.5 megawatt DC and 500 kilowatt energy storage system to provide power to the SUNY Fredonia university system. And the site is pretty much complete at this point. We're waiting for the energy storage system to be delivered in October. And the project is expected to come online in November. And the goal is to reduce the overall electricity costs for the university. And that's what we're doing through a 20-year PPA that's going to be backed by the New York Power Agency.
Did we lose Audrey?
Uh-oh.
She might have flipped off the call. That would be terrible. Well, let's move right in there, Moss, and keep going on this because the show must go on. Hopefully Audrey will rejoin us shortly as far as that goes. So
yeah, I can just continue on. We have 2 other universities that we've been awarded on as well. We haven't been able to announce that just yet until we finalize a couple of things, but we're expected to bring online roughly 15 megawatts DC online by March 31st, 2021. And we've also been awarded on a project with a rural electric cooperative down in North Carolina as well. And that project is expected to come online in 2021. And that's going to be another 15 megawatt DC. It's going to be grid connected. So very exciting time for our business. very busy. So
Okay,
Yeah,
so
no.
I'm back. I
Ah,
got
she's back. All right.
back. I don't
Worried
know
about
what
you there.
happened. I don't know what happened, but thank you, everyone. Really appreciate that. So, Moss, can we talk about the state perspective? Can we
Sure.
talk about Pennsylvania lagged significantly behind the rest of the nation in using renewables? Just, I think it's 0.04% of our grid energy comes from solar, and less than 2% comes from wind. So both of those numbers lag significantly behind the national averages, and that's not even talking about targets.
Yeah. So a lot of times the amount of renewables that's on the grid is driven by policy historically, and the policy front comes in the form of AEPS. So we call it interchangeably with RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standards. AEPS is Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards, and that sets the level of renewables that the retail serving entities have to procure. So if you're a utility, you're procuring power from the generators and you're selling them to your customers. The amount of power that they're consuming needs to come from renewables, right? And that percentage in Pennsylvania has been, very low compared to other states, including neighboring states as well. Within Pennsylvania's RPS, it's about 8% renewables is the target, but that 8% includes all kinds of other renewables as well. Solar carve out that exists today is only 0.5% by 2021. So that's a very, very low number. You're talking about less than 1% that's required to come from solar. And what Pennsylvania failed to do in the past is they also failed to close down the borders as well. So when they created this carve out, it was to kickstart the solar market, but what ended up happening was you had the other states like Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina projects dumping their solar credits into Pennsylvania. So what ended up happening was there's very little jobs created, very little investment in solar. So that 0.5% by 2021 is probably going to be met. So when you're talking about policy for solar and renewables in Pennsylvania, it's a couple of things. One, you have to increase the AEPS. Now, every region's different, every state's different. So I very much have sympathy towards that, and I think one of the things that we recognize, and I think should be said, is Pennsylvania doesn't have the best solar resource, right? I think there's no debating that. We don't have the best resource, but at the same time, in terms of the percentage of solar that we would want to make up the total generation mix is way too low, regardless of the solar resource. So that number needs to come up.
To what? What's the number need to come up to?
Well, I think the DEP did a study, I think it was last year or maybe the year before, that looked at, what would be the benefits to the state if they increased it to 4 to 8%, right, just for solar, or even if you increase it up to 10%. The benefit is obviously jobs. When you're looking at increased EPS percentages for solar, you're going to create the demand for projects to be built in Pennsylvania, and those projects are going to require other jobs, not just installers, right, and electricians, but also you're talking about other industries like legal side, from the financial service side, engineering firms, manufacturing firms. So there's going to be a benefit that's going to carry across to other industries as well. And the second thing is when you look at renewable energy in places like Pennsylvania, 1 kilowatt hour of electricity that's created from renewable energy is going to have a much, much more value than if you were to create that same kilowatt hour electricity in places like California. And the answer, why is that? I mean, the key thing is that when you look at what that kilowatt hour of electricity is replacing, in California, it's likely replacing a highly efficient gas plant. Here, you're replacing a peaker coal plant. So when you talk about air quality, right, the air pollution, having a renewable energy project here has much, much more value because of the negative externalities. And that's something that I think the market struggles to put value on. And I think there's a lot of people working in Harrisburg. It's a bipartisan effort to promote renewables within the state. They understand that renewables are going to create jobs. I think that's sentiment that's shared for most part. There's a bill in Harrisburg right now, HB 531, which is to promote community solar. And community solar allows, household residences to have a piece of that solar facility that's in their community. So instead of putting on your rooftop, it allows you to sign up for a solar project that allows you to experience the savings that solar would provide. I think I'm a big supporter of community solar. I think the reason for that is smaller projects tend to require local labor force. A lot of times, and this is where I butt heads with the solar industry, sometimes people are just incentivized to get as much capacity online as possible. But, a lot of times larger jobs may require larger amounts of construction workers. But those are temporary jobs. And a lot of times you're going to have migrant workers coming in from other states. So in terms of total jobs that's created, it's not going to be as much. So I think there's lots of good efforts going on. And I commend Governor Wolf for entering into RGGI as well. I think it's going to be a big plus to our region, because what RGGI does is creates a cap and trade program for carbon. And it brings in a significant amount of proceeds to the state, and the state can redeploy that capital into energy efficiency programs, the clean and renewable energy projects. So I think the right mindset is there in terms of investing in the region for clean energy.
So you have a couple of comments and statements. Jonathan, you want to go to them before my
Your internet goes south on you again? Absolutely. So Miles, a couple quick questions here. This actually I was just thinking about this myself. I mean, if Germany's using solar pretty successfully, I'm assuming PA could. We have some comments here from like Ellie Gordon saying, she says, I think Pittsburgh gets 80% of the usable sunlight for solar as Miami does. So there's no reason not to use renewables at max capacity here. Is that true?
Well, I think the costs have come down to the point where solar does make sense. And solar is able to provide a low cost of energy, even in Pennsylvania. We have several sites in Pennsylvania that we feel, comparative to the market, it's rather competitive. The key thing though is who's going to procure that power, and there's entities like as example, University of Pennsylvania and Penn State University. They are very much committed to procuring locally. And I commend them for that. Because the thing is, like I said, having a project here in this region has its benefits, right? A lot of it's external, negative externalities that you can't just pinpoint to. But, there are others, though, that decide, hey, we have our, sustainability goals, but we're going to go buy green erects from Texas. So it might meet their own personal goals in terms of buying credits, renewable energy credits, but what does it do to Pennsylvania? It really didn't do anything, right? So that commitment to buying local, I think it's important for entities that are out there that are thinking about reducing their carbon footprint.
I'll tell you what, I've got a great question here, Moss. I'm excited to see what you say on this one from Dave DeMays. He says, this is a complex one. At what point in the future do you expect that renewable energy could overwhelm economically the fossil fuel industry in terms of infrastructure and sustainability as sources to cover the most perceivable power needs?
I think from a national standpoint, I mean, we're already there. Every year, we have access to consultant reports from tier 1 consultants, and every year their forecast of fossil fuels goes down. Retirements are increasing at a much faster speed. So every revision that takes place, the retirement numbers keep going up.
Interesting.
In terms of the new additions of thermal continues to come down. On the flip side, the renewable forecast continues to go up. And as the energy storage costs have come down, when you're looking at some of the areas out in the West, for example, where there's lots of penetration by the renewables, energy storage starts to make sense as a peaker resource as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are we there yet in Pennsylvania in terms of energy storage as a peaker resource? No. I think we need to have a lot more higher penetration of renewables in this region to start to explore that. But the costs have been coming down on renewables, especially solar and wind, over the last 20 years. Now, for the last 10 years or so, when you look at utility scale solar, it's come down by like 70 some percent. I think it's like 78% has come down by. Right now, you're looking at system cost for utility scale that's under $1 a watt. Residential, you've seen it come down from probably around $6-7 10 years ago, down to probably closer to $3 now. It's over 50% reduction, and the costs are going to continue to come down. And we're looking at even module prices right now. Module prices right now, you're talking probably somewhere in the 30-cent range. You fast forward 3 years from now, you're probably talking somewhere in the mid-20 range. So the costs are going to continue to come down on solar and on energy storage. You're looking at a world just a couple of years ago, you're probably looking at over $1,000 a kilowatt hour. Now you're probably down to around $200-300 a kilowatt hour. So they've experienced themselves, a 70-80% reduction in their costs. So to answer your question, yes, we'll get there.
That is complex. It's so interesting. Our own Brian Kennedy, our own electric vehicle guru here, wants to know, do you see the demand for electricity to grow in future years as demand for electric vehicles starts to grow?
The electric vehicle industry, as they grow, there's certainly going to be a growth in the electricity demand. When you think about the magnitude of that, and recently I just read an IHS report. I think their forecast was, roughly 50% of the cars on the road by 2040 is going to be electric vehicles, and that's going to create a tremendous demand for electricity. And I think that's why some consulting firms like them, they do view gas as playing a significant role in the future still, in addition to renewables because of the increased demand. But without electric vehicles, our demand is pretty stagnant in most of the country. Mm-hmm. With the COVID, we've actually had reduction in electricity demand in this region and for most part of the country. Mm. But I think, like you said, it's a big item that we're bullish on as well. And as the cost of electricity continues to go down, we're going to see that market take off.
Very cool stuff. So the questions keep pouring in here. It's pretty crazy. You're definitely hitting some points here, Moss, which is just fantastic. Our next question, actually from Ellie Gordon, a regular of the show, wants to know, what can we do to help expand renewables here in Pittsburgh as a renter, using things like Green Mountain, any community solar programs or other initiatives that you might be able to recommend?
Yeah, there's Pennsylvania is you have your retail choice, so you can choose which provider that you want to provide you with electricity. For most of the residences here, the incumbent utility is Duquesne Light. But you can choose if you want more renewables. You can choose that through your retail choice. So you can go online and change providers. If you want more renewables, you can do that. And if you want Duquesne Light provide renewables, that you can make that point across as well.
Absolutely.
That you want them to procure more renewables, and to have that be a larger part of the mix.
Make your voice be heard. So a question from Mark Freeman here. This is a really cool one here, Moss. So listen to this one here. As natural gas combined cycle power plants continue to make world records in recent years and are now approaching 65% and perhaps may one day reach 70%, do you have any thoughts on how the investment / opportunities for MHI, GE, Siemens, et cetera, will be prioritized given the exciting breakthroughs in solar and other renewables in the US and abroad?
Sure. Our business is, our bread and butter from our parent company standpoint is gas turbines. And for them, they're seeing opportunities in the market with respect to hydrogen. So our gas turbines today can run off from hydrogen. at roughly 30%. And they just closed their first deal out in the West with LADWP. And that facility is expected to run off from hydrogen 30% and to transition to 100% hydrogen eventually. So for them, they want to leverage the technology efficiencies and the gains that they've made with their product over the years. And those gas plants, we just made an announcement, our parent company did, for a gas plant in New York and also in Ohio as well. And they are very efficient facilities. And I think the key thing right now is that to understand that these are flexible products as well. You know, as we see potential growth in hydrogen within the United States and the globe, these assets may be able to run off from hydrogen. And at that point, it becomes more of an energy storage system, right? Because you're taking excess renewables, or you're taking the renewables, you know, when the cost is low, you know, essentially creating hydrogen with it. And then you're going to turn that into dispatchable power later on. But you know, Mark's exactly right that, you know, the gas market, the gas turbines have experienced high efficiencies, and they continue to get better. And they can work from a grid standpoint in line with the other renewables that are coming online.
Makes a ton of sense. We've got another question here from Ed O'Neill. This is like a good basic one, maybe one we could start wrapping things up on, because we're getting close to our half an hour here. He wants to know, please suggest the best way to message to the public the jobs and benefits for PA for your industry. Short and sweet. This helps everyone promote the regional benefits of this. Give us our talking points.
About jobs. Sure. Renewable energy, when you think about it in itself, it's a project, right? It's a facility that needs to get built. So at the end of the day, there's the developers, there's the designers, the engineering firms, there's the actual installers, there's the electricians, right? These are all required to build a project, right? And that's just a small fraction of what it takes for a project development. So when there is a demand for those projects, it's going to require jobs. It's going to require those positions to be filled, right? For us, when we launched in 2018, at a point where the unemployment rate was the lowest in a long, long time, when we were trying to recruit people, we had to recruit from outside of the state, because it was impossible to hire in the state because everybody had jobs. When you're looking at times like today, when you're looking at, high unemployment rates, and this is the time to invest in this region, right, in this industry, to create these jobs, right, and to support the transition for some of these employees into this sector. And these are skilled jobs that pay very well. So I think it's it's one of those things that we can't stress enough, that this is a job story.
I think it's also it's an investment story too. It's an investment in the future, which very often, we miss the importance of investment. As we wrap up, Moss, Amy Britton asked a good question about House Bill 1970 and Senate Bill 929. Those are, providing customers who might not have access to solar energy. What are your thoughts on that legislation?
I think I'm supportive of that. I think a lot of times when legislation gets introduced with respect to LMI customers, I think the key thing is making sure that the policymakers are in step with the financing community, right? Because at the end of the day, these projects need to get financed, need to get owned by an investor, and what the investors are comfortable with. Right. A lot of times with these investments, the investors are interested in renewables, not just for the sustainability aspect of it, but it provides stable cash flows, right? So the credit quality of the off-takers, people who are purchasing power, is important. So making sure that the policymakers are in step with the financing community to design that policy so it works for everybody. I think that's important, because a lot of times when the policy is created but they are not in step with the financing community, that's where you have a disconnect. And even though the policy is there, projects may not get built.
So Moss, if people want to know more about Oriden, is there a website?
Yeah, we have a website, www.oridenpower.com. And you can also reach out to me as well,
Okay, great.
mas.ogiso at oridenpower.com.
Excellent. Can't thank you enough. Thank you everyone for joining. Tomorrow we actually have, tomorrow's Thursday, and we have Paul Mango, who's actually at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services leading Project Warp Speed. And we're very excited to hear about that. I think that affects all of us. Moss, keep up the great work. Thank you for expanding. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for pushing the issues around public policy. And everyone else, we'll see you same time tomorrow. I want to thank Jonathan Kirsting. And for whatever reason today, my technology was totally unstable. Usually it doesn't happen. And Jonathan Kirsting oversees all things marketing and media for the Tech Council. And he's been with the Tech Council for 23 years. How about that? So I want to thank everyone. Thanks again, Masahiro. Really appreciate your time with us. This topic really matters.
Thank you, everyone.